Welcome back. Today is the second lecture of the fourth week and we are going to discuss about the investment in energy projects. As I mentioned in the previous lecture that we are going to cover 5 topics or subtopics under the module energy supply during this week and next week, and here is the book that you can refer to if you want to go into further details. So this investment actually refers to the investment in energy resources, and in this lecture we are going to cover the same. So when we talk about the investment in energy projects, this is basically very different from investment in some other projects. Even if you want to compare with heavy manufacturing, the investment in power plants and other energy projects actually bear some very distinguished characteristics. What we are going to do is that we are going to discuss these unique characteristics of these energy projects, especially with regard to the power plant. And second, we are going to try to understand the how the cost benefit analysis can be carried out in order to take the decision in favor of or against the investment in the energy projects. So here we begin. What are the unique characteristics of the energy projects? In order to begin with, let us first discuss the first characteristic. All energy projects are extremely capital intensive in nature, which means that the initial investment of the energy projects are very high. In the previous lecture, we discussed that when we talk about the input of production, there are two types of inputs of production. One is a fixed input and the other is a variable input. So if you think about energy production, the fixed input, which is the capital that is required, is very high. So just to give you an idea of this, in India, to set up a 1 megawatt power plant, which can be gas fired or coal fired, it takes approximately 4 to 5 crore of rupees. Now, usually what is the size of the power plant? If you think about NTPC, that is the National Thermal Power Corporation, the size of the power plant that they have altogether is 36,041 megawatt. So you can imagine what is the volume of investment that is needed in order to set up a power plant. So this is one of the very distinguished characteristics of investment in any power project. The second important factor with this in this regard is that the economies of scale is attained at a higher level of production. So if you can think about, if you have less amount of money and you want to invest in a power project or in energy projects, you can think that you will be able to set up a smaller power plant, but that is basically not possible, because in case of power plant you get the economies of scale, so your variable inputs become efficient only at a higher level of production. So you can also recall the shape of the average cost curves, the shape of the productivity curves. You would see that the productivity curve actually will show initially it increases up to a certain point of time. So you actually want your productivity of variable input to go to the point from where it starts declining. Therefore, you need to produce a certain minimum amount of power in order to take advantage of the huge investment that you have carried out at the beginning. The next is the high running cost. So it's not only the capital cost for the power projects that are high, the variable costs are also high. So what are the variable costs? Other than labor or material, one of the major inputs of the production of energy is actually fuel. So this can be coal, this can be gas, this can be uranium, and so on. Or if you think about the renewable resources, this is the renewable energy, solar energy or wind energy. However, if we just keep aside the renewable part for a while and we think about the gas fired or coal fired power plants, then again to give you another example, a 1 megawatt power plant will consume approximately 350 to 600 kg of coal for per hour. So in order to produce 1 megawatt power for 1 hour, it requires 350 to 600 kg of coal. So you can imagine the huge expenditure that these kind of activities have to incur in order to produce energy. So not only the fixed cost but the running cost for energy projects are also very high. So however, if we come to the renewable energy, we will see that the running cost is not so high. So in case of the maybe the solar power, the running cost is really minimum. It's not neither labor intensive, nor you need any raw material or any fuel. So it can vary. The third point, which is again very important, is the asset specificity and the longevity of the capital investment that you have made. So the capital investment has gone up to set up a power plant, certain kind of machinery, you have purchased some asset and so on. Now these assets are very specific to energy production. So if tomorrow I decide that I do not want to continue with the production of energy, I cannot suddenly convert the power plant to some other manufacturing unit. So the asset that is required for the production of power in the energy projects are very specific to that particular project. Also, it's a matter of longevity. Once the project is there, once the plant is set up, it's not going to go away within a couple of years' time. So you cannot divert your investment within 2, 3, 4 years. Because once a power plant is set up, if you look at the conventional coal-fired or gas-fired power plants, it stays at least for 50 years. So once it is set up, it will stay at least for 40 years. Even for renewables, if you think about the hydropower projects, they are going to stay there for at least 25 years. So the longevity is huge. So if you invest some X amount of money today, first of all, this X is going to be very high. And the second is, you cannot divert this X amount, the asset that is purchased out of this X amount of money to something else for a huge period of time. So that creates a lot of uncertainty. So you are actually going to block your investment or going to block your money in a particular project for many number of years. So again, I would like you to think about the developing countries where the investment has competing demands. So if you are investing in one particular project where the investment is going to stay for 25 to 50 years, one has to be really careful to understand what is the outcome of that particular project. What are the private benefits going to be generated? Not only that, what are the social benefits that are going to be generated out of this investment? The final point that we are going to discuss here is the gestation lag. So for an investor, it's very important to understand the revenue flow. So if I am investing money today, I know tomorrow I am going to get my money back. But one needs to understand what is the difference between, or what is the distance between this quote unquote today and the quote unquote tomorrow. So in case of power plant, if I invest today, I can't expect an outcome down the line, within a month or within probably not even within a year. So the gestation lag, the lag between the investment and the generation of revenue, that is quite long in case of power projects. So if you take an example, for the conventional thermal power plants, it's about 5 to 6 years. So if you start building the power plant today, you have to wait for at least 5 to 6 years in order to produce power, to sell it in the market, and therefore to generate the revenue stream. However, again, if you think about the solar power, then the gestation lag is quite less. It's actually less than 1 year. Now, looking at all these features of energy projects, these kind of characteristics, it actually shows us that you need a lot of investment at one point of time where the money will be blocked for a reasonable period of time, and after that, the return is going to be generated. Now the question is, once this kind of investment is there, what is the outcome? If I consider that the outcome is the production of electricity, what are we going to do with that electricity? Now this electricity is actually going to support a lot of manufacturing activities, a lot of activities in the transport sector. The entire railway system is dependent on electricity, and at the same time, it's going to support a lot of household activities as well. So the outcome that is being generated, the output that is being generated, it not only generates a kind of income stream from the investor as well as the laborers who are working in the plant, but it also generates a certain stream of social benefit. So this is something we need to be very careful about. So since there is a social benefit which is generated out of the output that is being produced in the market, and it requires a lot of investment, and hence the private investors may not be interested to come and invest in this project. In this kind of a situation, we see the role of the government. So if you look at the investment in the power sector in India, most of the investment in the early days were coming from the government. Even today, when I was talking about this National Thermal Power Corporation, the NTPC, it's actually the government. The money for investment is actually coming from the government. Next, we said we will discuss about different criteria to analyze the cost and benefit that is being generated out of the energy projects. Now, when we do this kind of valuation, that is when we try to understand what is the cost of setting up or running a particular project vis-a-vis what are the kind of benefits that are going to be derived, we have to be able to distinguish between two concepts. One is the economic valuation and the other is the financial valuation. Let us have a quick look to understand what is the difference between these two concepts, economic valuation and financial valuation. So both of them, they actually try to appraise the probability of an investment. So both the criteria, the economic valuation as well as the financial valuation, they try to judge whether it's worth investing in a particular project or not. However, this worth is determined depending on two different sets of criteria, although partly overlapping of the cost as well as the benefit. So let us have a look at it. So if we think about the cost, so we are going to judge economic, we are not going to judge actually, we are going to compare the economic valuation and financial valuation in terms of these 6 criteria. One is the cost, the second is the externality, the third is the benefit, the fourth is the valuation, fifth is the role of inflation, and finally the benefit. So starting from here, starting from here, what is the cost? So when we think about the cost in terms of economic analysis, we take into account the social cost. So it's not only the private cost of investment or private cost of running the energy project, but we also take into consideration the social cost. However, when you are doing the financial valuation, actually we are talking about the monetary cost. So how much money do I need today in order to invest in an energy project? How much money do I need to run the project? So it's in monetary terms, and therefore, to give you a couple of examples, if you think again, we'll use the example of power plants again and again. If you think about the coal-fired thermal power plant, then it causes a lot of pollution if proper pollution abatement measures are not adopted in the plant. So if the pollution takes place, then this particular pollution is actually a component of economic cost. However, it is not a component of the financial cost. Now, why is it a component of the economic cost? Because see, if there is a lot of pollution, then it's going to it's going to kind of pollute the air quality. It's going to reduce the air quality, which will lead to a lot of health hazard. And if it leads to a lot of health hazard, then the private individual will have to incur a lot of cost. So this health hazard occurring due to pollution is basically a component of economic cost. However, it's difficult to get a monetary value of this cost, and therefore this is not included as a part of the financial cost. So therefore we say that the pollution is a cost, which is an economic cost in terms of economic analysis. However, it's not a cost when you are talking about financial valuation. Following this comes the concept of externality. Now, before I go into where you account for externality and where not, let us quickly have a understanding about the externality. So basically, externality is that kind of act which affects other behavior. So if I do something and that causes the behavioral decision of some other entity, then I am causing externality to the other person. So the externality can be both positive or negative. So the positive externality is actually those kind of situation where my activity is influencing the productivity of somebody else in a positive manner, and the negative externality is the other way around. So if you think about the emission of the power plants, this is causing a negative externality in the locality. So people will suffer from respiratory problem not for something that they have done, but something that has been done by the power plant. So the power plant is actually causing a negative externality in the locality. So in case of economic valuation, since you take the social cost, the concept of social cost, therefore this kind of externality needs to be internalized. However, in case of this financial valuation, because we are not taking into account the social cost, we are taking only the monetary value, there is no need to internalize the externality. Now, what is the outcome? We'll just quickly have a look at the diagram in order to understand what is the implication of internalization of externality in the context of big projects. So let us start with this kind of a framework where we have price and quantity, and this downward falling curve is actually telling you what is the demand curve. We can take any example for the time being. Let us take the example of the demand curve for electricity generated by the coal-fired power plants. So this is demand curve for electricity, and we are assuming that this electricity is coming from coal-fired power plant. Now there is a supply curve of the farm. Now that we know about the concept of the supply curve, we know that this positively sloped curve basically represents the upward rising part of the marginal cost curve over and above the average variable cost. Now this is the supply curve, this is the decision taken by a plant based on its own individual cost, or taking into account the financial cost. So this, when I talk about this marginal cost curve, private marginal cost curve, this is basically the financial, this comes out of the financial cost accounting. So if this is the supply curve and this is the demand curve, what is the market determined output? The market determined equilibrium is at E naught. So Q naught amount of electricity is being produced by this coal-fired power plant, and this is being sold at the price P naught. So this is the market equilibrium with the private marginal cost or the private supply curve. Now the problem with this is that it does not take into account the cost of pollution. Now suppose the government imposes a particular, it kind of mandates that each of these power plants, they have to use some kind of pollution abatement mechanism so that the emission is reduced. If that is the case, then the farm has to incorporate some additional cost. So this is what is called internalization of externality. So the externality that this power plant was creating is now being internalized in terms of additional cost. Now the moment the government actually forces this power plant to use emission control measures, the cost goes up. This is same as internalization of the externality. So now how does the supply curve look like? This is the new supply curve. Okay. So if you look at this part for production of each amount, this is the amount of cost, additional cost that the plant has to incur if it has to reduce the pollution. So this is also this line, this new supply curve can also be called the social marginal cost curve, where the externality has been internalized. However, if we take into account the cost of pollution, you will see that the equilibrium of the market changes. The new equilibrium now emerges at the point E1, where the price charged for per unit of electricity is P1, which is higher than the previous price, that is P0, that was emerging out of the private marginal cost. And you will also see that at this new equilibrium, the quantity supplied, bought and sold in the market of electricity is less than the quantity that was supplied under the private marginal cost. So the price has gone up and the quantity supplied has been reduced, or the market equilibrium quantity has been reduced. So the moment cost of pollution has taken into account, you see that the quantity of electricity produced, that is declined. So it says, and the price increases. So it says that when P0 was determined as the price, it did not include the cost of pollution. When you go for the social marginal cost curve, it also includes the cost of pollution. As a result, the price of the output goes up and the production that is supplied in the market reduces, giving rise to a new market equilibrium. So this is the concept of internalization of externality. Coming to the third point, so far we have talked about the cost. Now the question is, how do we come to the understanding about the benefit? So in case of economic valuation, both private benefit, which can be calculated in terms of profit as well as the social benefit has to be considered. So what is the difference between a private benefit and a social benefit? Suppose you are investing in a particular power energy project. It will not only lead to some profit which will accrue to the entrepreneur, it will also give employment to a lot of people. So this generation of employment is actually a social benefit. Whereas you can say that the wage that these individuals are earning, this is more of a private benefit, or that will be accounted in the financial valuation. So the wage that is being generated will be accounted for in the financial valuation. The investment will be accounted for in the financial valuation. However, the positive externality that will be created through the increase in employment will not be accounted for in financial valuation, but that will be accounted for in case of economic valuation. Now, understanding of these two different types of benefit becomes very important when we go into the discussion about the renewable and non-renewable. This is also, this can be also explained in terms of cost and externality. So in terms of benefit, if we are going for non-renewable resources, the fossil fuel based power generation, uh, and we compare it with the renewable based power generation, in both the cases the benefit that is being derived in terms of profit or in terms of production of electricity, they can be quite comparable. However, what is not comparable is the fact that if you look at the benefit of the non-renewable resources, there is hardly any benefit. In fact, there is a negative benefit or cost in terms of emission of greenhouse gases. However, if you think about the renewable resources, then there is a benefit which is actually an economic benefit or social benefit that is accruing in terms of reduction or mitigation of emission of greenhouse gases. So this is a particular form of benefit. If we can come up with the value of the mitigated emission, then that will be a part of economic valuation. However, in the absence of a market, if I cannot sell the carbon credits that I am getting, that will not be included as a part of financial valuation. So this is the difference between the benefit that we were talking about. Now, next we come to the method of valuation. Now, it's easy to do a valuation for the financial from a financial perspective, because everything will be judged in terms of the market price. So whatever component that we include under cost or benefit, that component will be analyzed in terms of its market price. So it's not very difficult to come out with the economic valuation. Now when we talk about, it's not very difficult to carry out the financial valuation. It has its own complexities, but the values are kind of known. However, things become very challenging when we really talk about, however, things become really challenging when we start talking about the economic valuation. So see, when we are talking about generation of employment, or when we are talking about reduction of pollution in the local vicinity, it does not have any value. So the reduction in pollution, the pollution which has been reduced, so the bad which has been curtailed, it doesn't have any market. So it doesn't provoke any kind of market price. So in that case, if you don't have any understanding of the price, how do you value something? How do you say what is the value of the emission mitigated, or what is the value of the pollution that has been reduced? In that case, sometimes we take some different approach, which is called a stated preference approach. There people are asked about their willingness to pay and willingness to accept. So for example, we can go and ask them, if the power plant actually reduces the pollution, how much money are you willing to pay because you are getting some fresh air? So this kind of willingness to pay or the willingness to accept. So where do you use the willingness to accept? You can go and ask the community that if I want to set up some wind turbine here, you are going to face some challenges. So what is the compensation that you would like to have? What is your willingness to accept? So these are the kind of some indirect method through stated preference how can go for economic valuation. However, we are not going to go into the detail of all these things. The next one is quite important. This is called the role of inflation. Now, what is inflation? Inflation is basically change or decrease in the value of money. So 10 rupees today is not equivalent to 10 rupees that was the value of 10 rupees 10 years back. So inflation reduces the value of money. So therefore, when we are talking about the value, when we are talking about the economic valuation, everything is valued at a constant price. So if I am thinking about today's 100 rupees and 100 rupees 10 years down the line, then this 100 rupees will not 200 rupees will not actually be added up, because I know that 10 years down the line, the 100 rupee will become maybe 200 rupees. So everything is valued at the constant price. So the inflation this way plays a role in the context of economic valuation. However, in case of financial valuation, everything is calculated at a current price. So there is no role of inflation that is taken into account. In fact, in case of financial valuation, later we will see inflation is a kind of contingency that will be kept in when the financial valuation is pursued. Finally, coming to the last point, we are saying that financial valuation is necessary but not a sufficient condition for the project appraisal. We also think about the externality, we also think about the social cost, etc., while taking a decision about the investment. Because there are certain investments which may not generate a huge private benefit, but there may be huge social benefit. So out of this context of this energy economics, one such example is setting up of schools. Once we understand the difference between the economic analysis and the financial analysis, the next important task is to identify the cost components and to identify the benefits. Let us first begin with the different cost components that one has to be careful about when thinking about taking a decision about investment. So what are these costs going to be covered or not? The first example is a sunk cost. So what is a sunk cost? This is a cost that has already been incurred, right? And it can no longer be recovered. So a very good example of sunk cost is that suppose you have an office and you have rented one particular room and you have painted that room. Now, when you are leaving that office, you are shifting your office after 1 year, you can't take the paint away with you. So the paint remains. So the investment that you had made, that is going to stay there, and there is no way that in which you can recover this. So this painting of room, the money spent on the training program, these are the costs which are called the sunk cost. So this kind of cost should be excluded from the financial cost and economic analysis as well while taking any decision about the continuation of a project. So this is something which is already gone. No way you can recover this. So just forget about this. The second one is the contingency. So this is the cost which will be incurred in the future, not now, depending on the past experience. So as we have already discussed that inflation is a contingency when you are calculating the financial cost. However, it is not included in the economic analysis because already you are valuing everything in a constant price. Okay, assuming the role of inflation away. The next important component is the transfer payment. So this is the kind of payment that transfers the command over resources from one entity to the other without any real change in the amount of resource or on the amount of production. So nothing changes other than the change in ownership. So if I give somebody 10 rupees, that's just a change of ownership of that 10 rupees. However, at the background, there is no production or consumption activity that has been changed. Right? So this kind of payment is called transfer payment. One very good example of transfer is tax and subsidy. So when we are giving tax to the government or getting subsidy from the government, the underlying production structure doesn't change. It's only the money transferred to the government. However, when you are doing an economic analysis, it's very important that you consider the post-tax or post-subsidy price of both inputs as well as output. So although you do not take into consideration, although you do not take transfer payment as a component, right, of your cost, but it will be when you are talking about the input and output, they should be post-tax or post-subsidy inputs and outputs. The next one is depreciation. What is depreciation? So think about a power plant which has been set up and there is a particular machinery which is there which can run for 10 years. So today I invest 1 crore of rupees to buy this machinery which will run for 10 years. But what happens after that? I will run out of money because there is some wear and tear, there is some decay in the machine, and the machine will stop working after 10 years. So what I do, I calculate the value of wear and tear every year and I set aside a particular amount of money. So at the end of the 10th year, I have enough money in order to replace the non-functional machinery. Now the amount of money that is being kept or set aside as as a compensation for the wear and tear of the machinery is called the depreciation. Now, when we talk about the depreciation, this is of course a cost that has been incurred by the energy producers or any other producers per se. However, if you think about depreciation, this is more like a financial cost that is being set aside. But this is actually not a part of the economic cost, because if you do not, even if you do not take the depreciation, you get the true value of the machine. So what you are doing through depreciation, you are actually building up some you are actually trying to what do I say replenish some amount of money, so that at the end of the 10 years you don't see that the machine is not there and you also don't have some money to invest. So depreciation is not a part of the economic analysis, but it's taken into account in case of financial analysis. The fifth one is called the depletion premium. Now, what is the depletion premium? If you think about the non-renewable resources, these non-renewable resources are depleted. So, there is a depletion at some point of time. It will no longer be there to be extracted, and therefore beyond that point, it's not able to use this kind of resources. Because we are depriving the future from the use of these resources and we are using it today, this is called the depletion premium. And this depletion premium or depletion rent of this kind of resources are included in the economic analysis. So this is something like a time value. The final one is the externality. This we have already discussed. So economic analysis, we know that takes into account the cost of externality and hence tries to internalize the same. However, in case of the financial cost, we do not take into consideration the cost of externality. The next steps after you identify the costs is to identify the benefits. Now the benefits can be of two types. One is the direct benefit and the other is the indirect benefit. What is the direct benefit from setting up of, for example, maybe hydropower project? One benefit is definitely that you are producing electricity. Electricity has a particular price and therefore electricity is being bought and sold in the market and it's generating some revenue. So this is one particular direct benefit that you are getting. The second benefit is of course the revenue that is being generated is through that the labors are being paid, the raw material are purchased, the machinery are maintained, and the entrepreneur also earns some profit. So these are the direct benefit that you generate by the production of energy, for example. There are, however, certain indirect benefits as well. What are those indirect benefits? If there is a dam, that will attract a lot of tourists. So that is the indirect benefit that you have. So the other thing could be that there can be a certain kind of locality which is built up, there will be a hospital which will come up, there will be a settlement, there will be some school and so on. So there are diverse benefits which are being generated from this particular project, which is not directly linked with that project but has some other social benefits. So when we are doing economic analysis, it's actually important to identify both the private benefit or the financial benefit as well as many social benefits as one can. Once the benefit and costs are identified, it's important to quantify the cost and benefit. So what is the value that you are going to attach to the cost and what is the value that you are going to attach to the benefit? Now doing this is relatively easy if you have a full functional competitive market in place, but if that is not there, it sometimes becomes a little tricky. So for different kind of inputs, there are different methods how you can go about for the quantification of both cost and benefit. We are not going to go into the details of understanding the of quantification of cost and benefit, but what we will do is that briefly we are going to discuss four methods which come really handy when you try to do the cost benefit comparison with respect to any energy related project. These are fairly general mechanisms, so it's not only applicable or uniquely applicable in the context of energy projects, but this is generally applicable for any project appraisal or any project evaluation. So here we start. When we think about the cost and benefit, there are two ways how one can perceive the concept of cost as well as the concept of benefit. One is without the time value that we have here, without the time value. So we'll plot these two here, and the other is with the time value. What is the difference between without time value and with time value? So if we are analyzing something without a time value, there we essentially assume that money doesn't grow over time. Whereas if we are taking the time value into account, we assume that money yields value over time. In another word, one can say under the context of without time value, it says that the money has no opportunity cost, whereas with time value we say that money has an opportunity cost. Let me just elaborate it with another very simple example. So if I have 100 rupees today, so without the time value, I would say if I keep away the inflation, right? I'm assuming that there is no inflation, even if without the inflation. If today I have 100 rupees in my pocket, I will say that tomorrow I will also have 100 rupees in pocket, and 1 year down the line I will also have 100 rupees in the pocket. This is my perception without the time value. However, if I take into account the value of time, I will say that today the money, that amount that I have in my pocket is 100 rupees. Therefore, if there is a 5 rupees prevailing rate of interest in the banks or in some, in investment, then I can invest this money, and down the line after 1 year, this 100 rupees will become 105 rupees. So that is the difference between the concept of the time value. So we start with a very simple concept which doesn't take into account the time value, but it's a very sort of first hand way. It's a very sort of, I would say, very initial crude measure to judge, but it gives you a very quick number and a quick way to assess how long will you take to get your money back from an investment. So this is called the simple payback period, SPP. This is the number of years required in order to recover your initial investment. Again, to say this is a very crude measure, but this gives you probably the first number of the project evaluation. So what do we do here? We take the initial investment, which you can also call the first cost, and then you divide it by the yearly benefit by yearly cost. So this is the yearly benefit, yearly net benefit, right? If you have different net benefits that you are getting in different years, you may also take an average of that. So an example will make it clear. So the example goes like this. You have two options. You want to upgrade one of your projects. The option A has an initial cost of 12 lakh rupees and an annual saving of rupees 4 lakh. So the initial investment that you can see here, right, this is 12 lakh rupees, and yearly benefit minus yearly cost, which is represented as annual savings, is 4 lakhs. So these terms may vary a little bit. However, you need to understand the meaning. The second option, it has a lower initial cost. So if you see that the numerator is much less, so it's only 10 lakh. However, your denominator is also low as your annual saving is only 2.5 lakh. Now the question is, which option should you choose in order to select one particular form of investment based on the indicator of simple payback period. For option 1, the simple payback period is given by 12 lakh divided by 4 lakh, that is 3. So the interesting part is that here I have written 12 by 4. So this is 12 lakh, okay? So this is 12 lakh, and this is 4 lakh per year. So the lakhs, the rupee units cancel out, and what we are left with is the unit year. So SPP is represented in terms of number of years. So roughly, or very crudely, you need 3 years in order to recover your initial investment. For the second one, the the simple payback period is 10 by 2.5, that is 4 years. So what we can see here is that although the initial investment is less in case of the second option, the payback period is smaller in case of the first option. So if you are guided by this particular criteria, then probably it's better to go for option 1. Now, as I said, that there are various advantages of using this simple payback period, but as a starting point, the final decision is never taken on the basis of simple payback period. For example, if you calculate the SPP and you find out that simple payback period is something like maybe 70 years or 80 years, then of course you don't go for that project. But however, if you find that there are two options, in one case you have the simple payback period for 3 years and for the other it's 4 years, you do not take in the decision immediately about which project to choose, but all that you can say that both the projects, they are viable. So you can go for either of them, 3 to 4, it doesn't matter. So you kind of use this criteria more for rejection and not for the final acceptance. Now, one problem with this simple payback period is that it's biased towards the front-loaded cash flow. So, it's only talking about the number of years within which you are going to recover your cost. So, it might be the case that, see, in this particular project, what we are saying that the yearly flow, yearly net savings is 2.5, but that is for 4 years, right? Maybe beyond the 4 years, this net saving can increase, which cannot be captured within the concept of the simple payback period. So the next one is called the return on investment, or the ROI. This is also without the time value. Here also we assume that if I keep 100 rupees in my pocket today, 1 year down the line it will stay as 100 rupees, right? It has no value. So I'm not going to put it in the bank. I'm not going to put it in any investment to yield more money out of it. So what is the return on investment? This is actually the annual return expressed as a percentage of initial investment. So what percentage of initial investment are you getting every year as the net cash flow? Here also we are going to elaborate this concept of ROI with the help of an example. We take the same example as we have discussed in case of the simple payback period. So you have option 1 with 12 lakh of initial investment and net annual cash flow of rupees 4 lakh, and the other investment which is 10 lakh as the initial investment and 2.5 lakh of rupees at annual net cash flow. If we calculate the ROI, for the first option, the return on investment is 33.3%, which is derived by dividing 4 by 12 and multiplying the same by 100. In the second case, the return of investment, option B, is basically 25%. So we see that in the first case, not only the simple payback period is smaller, that is not only you are getting your money back quickly, but the return on investment is also higher in case of this. This is this is quite intuitive. I mean, because you are getting money back faster, that is why you can get all your money back within fewer number of years. So here also one should go for option 1 if you want to go by the return on investment. Now, return on investment is usually the second step after the simple payback period, but it fails to justify a project which has high social benefit. So as I was talking about, schools. In this case, although it's not in the context of power generation, but if you think about schools or hospitals, the rate of the return on investment is usually very low. However, it generates a huge social benefit or economic benefit, which is not being taken care of while calculating the ROI. So this is not really useful when you are evaluating project with high social benefits. As you have seen that both these options, the simple payback period as well as the return on investment, they do not take into account the time value of money. So we move on to something a bit sophisticated, which is called the net present value. This is perhaps the most used indicator in order to appraise the projects, and this takes care of the time value of money. Let us have a quick look at what is the net present value. So basically, the net present value is the difference between the present values of cost and benefit. So if you look at the formula here, NPV we say is summation over T. T is the time period, so summation over T, RT divided by 1 plus I to the power T minus summation over T, CT divided by 1 plus I to the power T minus I naught. So what is RT? RT is the return from the project generated at time period T. I is the rate of interest that is prevailing in the market. CT is the cost, this is the running cost that you have to incur at time period T in order to run the project. And I again is the same rate of interest. I naught, capital I naught is the initial investment in the project, and the assumption is that this investment is being made today. So 0 is the starting point. I naught means here T is equal to 0. Now you can also write it as summation T RT minus CT whole divided by 1 plus I to the power T minus I naught. That is also possible. So in that case, RT minus CT will actually give you the net benefit at the time point T. Now, why are we writing it in this manner? Because we are calling this the present value. Before we go to that, let us have a quick discussion on the concept of present value and the future value. Here also I am going to take the help of an example which we have already discussed when we were talking about the energy demand and how the growth rates are used in order to understand the energy demand. So this is the same example, the 1000 rupees that has been kept in bank at the per annum interest rate of 5% and the money is growing in the bank. So at time point T, the money that I have is 1000 rupees at time point T equal to 1. The money that I have has grown at the rate of 0.05 and therefore the money that I have is 1000 multiplied by 1 plus 1.05, 1 plus 0.05. And similarly at the end of time period T equal to capital T, the money that I have is equal to M naught, which is 1000 multiplied by 1 plus 0.05 to the power capital T. So the growth rate is 0.05%. So there we said that the end value divided by start value to the power 1 divided by T minus 1 is the growth rate. But here we are actually interested in the end value and the start value. We are giving them two different names. So what are the names? So what I am saying is that the present value of the money is 1000 rupees. So the money that I have, the value of that money today is 1000 rupees. So that is the present value. So the value today. The future value of the money after T years down the line is going to be 1000 multiplied by 1 plus 0.05 to the power T. So this entire expression 1000 multiplied by 1 plus 0.05 to the power T, this is the future value of this 1000 rupees. Therefore, what we see is that the future value of any amount of money is equal to present value multiplied by 1 plus growth rate to the power the time period. Or what we can write present value is equal to future value divided by 1 plus growth rate to the power T. Now, if you see that the present value is equal to future value divided by 1 plus growth rate to the power T, you can actually connect the concept of this end value and the start value. They are pretty much the same. So the start value is basically the present value and the end value is basically the future value. So here so far what we have discussed is that so today's 1000 rupees is down 1 year down the line after 1 year actually becomes more than 1000 rupees. So in the similar manner what I can say that if I'm promised to get 1000 rupees after 1 year, in today's valuation, that 1000 rupees which I am going to get after 1 year is less than 1000 rupees. So 1000 rupees after 1 year is less than 1000 rupees today. Because if I put less than 1000 rupees in my bank, which gives me a certain rate of interest, I'll be able to get 1000 rupees tomorrow. So if there is a positive rate of growth, the present value is less than the future value. If there is a rate of decline, then the present value is greater than the future value. So this is something what we are going to keep in mind in the discussion. So here we come with the concept of net present value again. So see, when we are saying that this is summation over TRT, so this is the revenue stream that is being generated from a particular project. So this is the revenue stream generated from a particular project. If we are thinking about 5 time points, this will be R0 plus R1 plus R2 plus so on and R5. And then we are calculating the present value. So if I am going to get the amount RT 1 year down the line, what is the present value of that RT? If I am going to get a different RT 2 year down the line, what is the present value of that? What is the present value of the revenue that I am going to get 3 year down the line? Similar concept for the cost. I am going to incur some cost, and of course you can understand this is the variable cost that I am talking about. If I am going to incur a cost C1 1 year down the line, then what is the equivalence of that money if I want to have it today? What is the present value of that? If I am going to incur a cost of C2 2 years down the line, then what is the amount of money that the amount of what is today's equivalent, right? And I not see, since this is the investment that I am incurring today, it does not need to be converted to anything, because this is anyway the present value that I am talking about. So what the NPV actually does is that it converts a stream of net benefits, that is RT minus CT, accruing at different points of time to their present values and then aggregates them. So that is the job of the net present value. Let us take a look at a quick example which will make things probably clearer. So suppose the initial investment that a project requires is 1000 rupees. So this is some imaginary project with a very nominal kind of initial investment required. So this is I naught. The second information that is given to you, the yearly net revenue, so that is R minus C, this is RT minus CT, generated by this project is rupees 2000 and it continues for 10 years. So one assumption that we are making here is that the RT minus CT doesn't change over time. But even if you make them change over time, the logic remains more or less, actually absolutely the same. So you are getting 2000 rupees every year as a net revenue, and this revenue stream continues for next 10 years. Now assume there prevails a 5% rate of interest. So the question is, if you are getting 2000 rupees after 1 year, what is the present value of that 2000 rupees? If you are going to get 2000 rupees after 10 years, what is the present value of that 2000 rupees today? So here you can make the calculation like this. So the 2000 rupees that you are going to get after 1 year, the present value of that 2000 rupees is 1905. In other way, what we can say is that if I keep 1905 rupees in the bank today with a 5% rate of interest, 1 year down the line I am going to get 2000 rupees. So if the future value is 2000 rupees 1 year down the line with an interest rate of 5, then the present value is 1905 rupees. Similarly, if I am going to get this 2000 rupees 2 years down the line, then the present value of the 2000 rupees is 1814 rupees, which means if I keep 1814 rupees in bank in an average annual rate of growth of 5%, then 2 year down the line I will get 2000 rupees. Similarly, if I am going to get 2000 rupees 10 year down the line, then the present value of that 2000 rupees is 1228 rupees, which means if I keep 1228 rupees in the bank at 5% annual average annual rate of growth, then after 10 years this will become 2000 rupees. So this is the present value of 2000 rupees that I am going to get every year. And then for the net present value, what I am doing, I have to add all these net present values together. So what I see, if I add 1905, 1824 plus 1728 plus 100 or 1228, the value that I get, so 1500 443, this is actually the present value of the net revenue derived from the project. So if you add up all these present values, what you get is the gross present value, which is 1500 443. Now this is the gross present value. However, today you are making an investment of 10,000 rupees. So what is your net present value? Your net present value is 15,443 minus 10,000, which is 5,443. So you see that your net present value is actually positive. So the project which has net present value is actually worth considering. Anything that has a negative net present value is not really worth. Next we come to the next. Okay, before we go to this internal rate of return, let us tell one more thing about the net present value. Not only you use net present value as a criteria in order to understand whether you should consider a project or not, the present value is also used for the ranking of the projects. So you can rank different options or different projects based on their net present value. So higher the net present value of a project, the more lucrative will that project be. It's more reliable to invest in that particular project. The final concept that we are going to discuss here is called the internal rate of return or IRR. What is internal rate of return? This is actually related to the concept of net present value. It says IRR is that rate of return for which the NPV is equal to 0. So it is that rate of return for which the net present value or the net present value is equal to 0. So whatever benefit that you are deriving, the present value of that benefit, so all your net revenue, the present value of your net revenue is equal to what you are going to spend. So that is the internal rate of return. Now in calculation of internal rate of return, there are certain complexities. As you can see, if you want to solve this particular equation, this NPV equal to 0, it will actually give you multiple solutions for I. So that is one problem. The second problem is sometimes it's difficult to take IRR as sort of a deciding factor, because oftentimes you don't know what you want to compare with. However, if oftentimes what happens, people do compare the internal rate of return with the market rate of interest. So a project is acceptable if the internal rate of return is above the prevailing market rate of interest. So if for a particular value of R, a particular value of I, this becomes 0, then of course I know if the market interest rate is lower than that, then I will have a positive NPV. Okay, this value will be positive. So a project is acceptable if internal rate of return is above the prevailing market rate of interest. So these are the four very most used criteria for project evaluation, and they become really handy when an investor is trying to understand whether to invest or not to invest in an energy project. Because let us recall this again, the investment in the energy project, they are very high, it has huge gestation period, and moreover once you invest the money there, the money is blocked because you cannot transfer your assets to some other kind of projection, and there are lots of risks involved in the context of energy projects. So this is where we stop our discussion on investment in energy projects. This is a very broad discussion, I would say. Most of the things are not very specific to energy projects, but these are actually specific to the evaluation of any big project. We are going to stop here for the second lecture. In the third lecture, we'll meet again and we'll discuss some more interesting issues on energy supply. Thank you. See you again.